everyone. So after I did the update video on Saturday night, things took a very bad turn yesterday. When I came home on Saturday, I told you that Samara was doing better and everyone was relieved because she was heading in the right direction, even though it was a very slow turn in the right direction and there were still many concerns. There were many positives on Saturday night. Sunday, Sammy called me from the hospital and told me she was requiring 2 liters of oxygen and was still having drops in her saturations, her oxygen levels. And then he called me a few hours later and told me she was at 4 liters and still having issues maintaining her oxygen levels. And then she was at 5 liters. At that point, I told him to find out when they were going to do the next blood gas, which is a test that kind of looks at how she's being ventilated, and it also looks at her electrolytes and her hemoglobin. And they ended up ordering that test to be done sooner because they were originally doing it every 12 hours. And so when they did that, they saw that her hemoglobin had dropped to like 5.6. And so it wasn't a ventilation issue from her vents. It was more about her not having sufficient blood, which would cause respiratory issues. So they ordered a blood transfusion and also a platelet transfusion. And while this was all happening, she started passing blood clots from her behind, from her rectum. And so I went to the hospital earlier than expected because everything was happening. And while I was there, I also witnessed her passing blood clots. So it wasn't no longer blood in her stool. It was very little stool, very little urine, and just blood pouring out of her in big quarter-sized clots sometimes, and smaller clots than that sometimes, but it was like Pampers full of just blood. And then the PICU doctor came in and he decided to check her G-tube because one of the things that they had kept saying was that she wasn't bleeding from her G-tube, which is the tube where she gets fed by, but she hasn't been getting fed since she's been so sick. She's been getting IV nutrition called TPN. And so he flushed her G-tube with some water, and when he pulled back to see what would come back, it was blood coming out of her G-tube as well. By this morning, she was having blood coming out of her mouth. We were suctioning blood out of her mouth. And later in that afternoon, later in the morning, she was having blood even in her trach. So she has blood everywhere. They moved up the endoscopy because now it became an emergency. They moved up the endoscopy to this morning, and they did the endoscopy and found that she's bleeding from many areas of her stomach. Like pretty much her whole stomach is bleeding, and they found many large clots. So they cauterized the areas that they could cauterize. And cauterize basically, I guess, means to like, zap those areas so that they stop bleeding. That's the best way I know how to put it, really. But they couldn't do her whole stomach, obviously. So they did what they could, and they did a biopsy of some part of her stomach. At this point, I'm so tired, I don't even remember which part. And then they also have her on some medications, one through her G-tube and then the others through IV to help stop the bleeding. So she's very sick. She's really not peeing hardly at all anymore. We've also observed that over the last like 2 or 3 days, when she pees, it's like she's crying and pushing to pee, which she wasn't doing before. And so I think today they were going to run some tests also to rule out some things regarding that. Her kidney function test, her renal function panel that shows how her kidneys are doing, are getting increasingly worse. It's like everything has just gone in the wrong direction, and it truly feels as if we took a step forward and 2 steps back. This has been a really, really bad 2 days. Even her skin that was starting to look a little bit better looks horrendous. It is, I said before she looked like she'd been in a fire. She almost looked like she was set on fire. Like this has been unbelievably sad. And, today and yesterday, I've cried a lot, and I've had a lot of difficult conversations with doctors and with nurses. And, you know, today our nurse, who's gotten to know us pretty well over the last few weeks, you know, because I was just talking about, like, you know, feelings of distrust for some of the ways that, you know, people are handling things, and concern about the procedure she was going to have today. And, you know, I feel disappointed in a lot of how some of her medical care had handled in some areas. And I was just, you know, really frustrated and venting today in the hospital. And the nurse said something that helped remind me and calm me down. And she said, you know, we've been talking a lot, Elise, and you don't have to trust anyone. You don't have to trust the doctor that's going to do the procedure. You don't have to trust the doctors that are treating her here, but you do need to remember to trust God. And that brought me right back to where I needed to be from the beginning, where I've been trusting God. But then when things get scary, it's so easy to get caught up in that fear that I've discussed in the past videos, and to get frustrated and let anger take over. And it's so easy to let our emotions get the best of us. And that's where I feel like I've been in the last 2 days. I've been trying to hold on to my sanity and hold on to peace and to my faith in God. And then there's like this tug of war of feeling despair and a lack of control, and so many worries and thinking about outcomes. And then I've had to stop myself and remember that God is in control. And I truly do believe that. We had an interesting conversation with one of her doctors today. And, you know, we talked about our faith, and we explained that, you know, although of course we pray for our daughter to be healed, we also pray for God's will to be done. We're not unreasonable parents that just want our child to be alive and just go through things regardless of how she's doing. And so God knows his plans for Samara. And as we explained to him today, we continue to fight for her as long as she continues to fight, because at this point, God hasn't told us that it's over. And so he asked us, like, well, what is the end point? And I said, God will make that clear, because we don't know what the end point is. Nor am I going to draw a line and say, this is where I decide I can't do this anymore. And so I continue to trust God. We continue to put Samara in God's hands. We continue to pray and ask God to direct us in the decisions that we make for her, because ultimately we don't want her to suffer either. But we know that God can get her through this. And just as she was improving a few days ago, and we've been on this roller coaster, we know what God is capable of. We've seen him take her out of situations that looked hopeless before. And so this is the update. You know, I ask that you continue to pray for Samara, because she is at a very unstable place right now. And she needs a lot of prayer. And we ask that you pray that God's will be done, that he give us the direction, the understanding, and the peace that we need as we continue to advocate for our child. Thank you, and many blessings.